Sinn Féin spokesperson on enterprise trade and employment, and thank you both very much for joining us this evening. Duncan, I'll start with yourself and that warning from your organisation that hundreds of retailers are on the brink of closure. A very stark warning. How close do you think they are to closure, and can anything be done to avert it?
Yeah, look, Sarah, very close at this point. We've had, out of the last 13 months, I think it's now, 7.5, 8 months that retailers have been shut. And this last lockdown since the 30th of December, we're 4 months in. Most retailers were saying to us at the start of the year, the ones that were open were saying that, the little bit of money they made up to Christmas may have tied them over into maybe early January, February time. But, as it's gone on, more and more are saying they're going to be shutting their doors, or that they'll try their hand just trading online. And this comes on the back of those high-profile store closures that we saw last year. Debenhams was mentioned there, Oasis, Arcadia Group with Topshop, Cath Kidston, Warehouse, House of Fraser. The list goes on, and of course these are only the high-profile ones that we're talking about. It doesn't take into account the smaller independent retailers that make up the core and the heart of our communities. So and we are aware that there's something like 2,000 additional vacancies across retail at the end of 2020 compared to the end of 2019. So it's been a really hard year for non-essential retail in particular. And this announcement with Carphone Warehouse today is just another of a string of these things, and the trend continues. So
what can be done, Duncan, or can anything be done? Is there a certain inevitability to this? Do you think that there will be hundreds of retailers that will simply not reopen when they're finally allowed to do so?
Well, look, I think, first off, the retail environment is changing enormously. People are moving online. So, good retailers have been able to move and shift their businesses online. You can see it in terms of the number of deliveries arriving at the front door. We're all finding it very convenient. So I think retail will shift in terms of we will still see people shopping online. We will see a bit of a bounce back, I'm sure, when retail does reopen. But the thing that we really need here is number one, for the government to turn around and just announce that date in May when they're going to go open, and don't end up with a phased reopening that's going to be, we'll open part of it at the start and the rest of it at the end. We need to get retail back up and running on the 4th and 5th of May, not just with click and collect, just with everything, with all non-essential retail, get it moving. And then we need the additional financial supports, things like the extension of the rates waivers, the further online grants, the restart grants, and the big elephant in the room, Sarah, which is rents. We've got a lot of businesses out there who have been plagued by their landlords to pay rents for a period of times that they've been shut. And our call on government is to introduce some form of arbitration body, legally binding, that can help get through this quagmire, which is going to become and unleash itself on us in May if we don't manage this rent situation.
In relation to those supports and the support schemes and an extension of them, both Finance Minister Paschal Donohoe and Minister Michael McGrath, the Public Expenditure Minister, they've pledged those income support schemes will be extended beyond June, but we don't have an end date on them. How long do you think supports need to be extended for, and do you accept that there is an issue here for government in that they don't want to be giving supports to some businesses that simply will not be viable again?
Yeah, look, as I say, I think retail is changing. I mean, how long should this go on for? Certainly through until the end of Q3, if not into the end of the year. Things like the rates waivers have been basically extended every quarter from the time the pandemic started until now. Those things need to be extended, but they need to be focused in the right way. So, the online retail scheme that was run by Enterprise Ireland and something similar for smaller retailers through the local enterprise offices was really well welcomed, because it did support retailers in making this transition and becoming more omni-channel, where they've got both bricks and mortar and online trading. And yet the last online retail scheme that we had from Enterprise Ireland was back in September of last year. So, and it's been pledged that online retail scheme will happen again, but we're still waiting. I mean, I was told by Minister English this was going to happen in January, February of this year. I'm still waiting here in April, looking for that scheme to be reintroduced. So, it needs to be targeted, Sarah.
Stay with us if you don't mind, Duncan. We also have Louise O'Reilly from Sinn Féin on the line. And Louise, I'm interested in your thoughts on Duncan's suggestion or call there for all non-essential retail, all of it, to be reopened in early May, which is a little over a week away.
Well, I think first things first, Sarah, we need to remember that we're here discussing the fact that 486 people just received some very devastating news. It came to them out of the blue. It's the worst news that anyone could possibly, among the worst news that people can get. They're getting it at the absolute worst possible time. And it's heartbreaking when we note that the Carphone warehouse is now being added to what is a very, very long list. And we see the Debenhams workers, they're over 400 days out on strike for their redundancy. So, we need to also remember that while there are bigger issues, absolutely, in terms of the broader sector, there are 486 people this morning who got absolutely devastating news.
So in terms of trying to avert more devastating news, Retail Excellence is saying let us open, and let us open in early May. Does Sinn Féin support that call?
But I think one of the things that has been very damaging for business, not just for retail but right across, has been yo-yoing in and out of lockdown. So we need to know from the government that when they do signal that the public health advice is signalling that retail can restart, that is going to be put on a more permanent footing, because certainly when I'm interacting with people in the business communities, what they're telling me is that yo-yoing in and out of lockdown is incredibly disruptive. It makes it very, very hard for them to plan. So I do think that the government need obviously to be guided by the public health advice, and we need to see that they have said repeatedly that we would be driven by, that the government would be driven by data and not dates.
Okay.
I think they need to engage with the sector and let them know and give them that certainty that when they say reopening will start, that it will be put on a more permanent
Duncan,
footing so that people can plan.
what do you make of that? Sinn Féin supports the government's line, which is that they'll be led by public health advice on any reopening.
Yeah, but look, I mean, absolutely. We've been led by public health advice all the way through this. And, the government have moved from dates to data, and they have said that the data they're looking at is the hospital occupancy rates and the number of cases and the rollout of the vaccine. Well, you've only got to look at the hospital occupancy rate at the moment. What is it now? 170 odd people in hospital, and the rate's now below 50 in terms of those in ICU. At what point does it become, difficult to now reopen? We've been living with this for long enough now, and we do need the government to give us a definite roadmap.
Okay.
And they haven't been
Duncan,
giving us
can I ask you just in relation to the rents? I just want to see what Sinn Féin think of it in relation to this arbitration system that you're calling for disputes about unpaid rents, and how big an issue that is for retailers. When you say arbitration, are you saying that you're looking for a system whereby some members or some retailers won't be paying back all the rent that they owe, or pay all the rent that they owe, some write down of rent?
There needs to be some mechanism to get retailers and commercial property owners round the table, some legally binding method by which short-term arrangements can be put in place on the lease. The sort of things that we've suggested to government is a turnover-based scheme. So let's say 10% of the rent paid for the next 6 months, all legally binding, or a discounted rent of some description. The alternative to this, Sarah, is that we will just see stores, shutters being pulled down on stores, and they won't be rented again,
Louise, would Sinn Féin support something like that?
I think that's an interesting idea, all right, and well worth exploring. But I do think we also need to look at the fact that there is a massive amount of warehoused debt. So when these businesses reopen, they are going to need help from the government to be able to deal with that, because the last thing we want are businesses reopening and then finding out that they cannot trade. And we also need to look at what the government can do to drive demand and to encourage people to go back to retail. And I welcome the call from Mandate for a forum on the future of retail. I think that's really important, and I think we need to look at whether or not we can get people back onto the high street, whether or not that can be done by the use of hubs in our towns and cities so that people don't have to commute. It's very environmentally friendly, but the government have a role here in creating vibrant towns, vibrant cities, places where people want to go, where there are services. You've just been having that conversation in relation to the provision of public toilets in Dublin City. So places that are pleasant to be, where there are services there, where people can come together, can congregate, and can, use and avail of the retail opportunities that are there. And I think the government far too often have stood back, washed their hands and said, well, retail is changing. I think the government have a role in trying to encourage new forms of retail, absolutely, but also in salvaging, let's not forget, these are big employers, salvaging the jobs that are there. And, when we talk about the workers who have lost their jobs today,
would say that they are
if I could just make one point in relation to the Taoiseach had very much a hands-off approach. He shrugged his shoulders, said retail is changing. Well, I think the government have a role in shaping that, but the government also have a report from Duffy Cahill sitting on their desk in relation to protecting workers and redundancies. They need to act on that too. A lot of the spade work has been done here. The government simply need to read what's there, make a decision and start to move on that.
All right, I want to ask you, Louise, separately about the news that we heard yesterday, which is that all political parties will come before the Oireachtas Housing Committee to answer